All right, so setting up the drum kit in a way that's balanced and will be the most efficient for your body and the way you play, that's what this video is about. So I like to start basically with nothing set up and start from the foundation and work up. So first thing you want to do is grab your throne. Now, from the last video, we already talked about throne height. So hopefully your throne is already at the right height. And basically what you want to do is put that down and figure out which direction that you want to face. So a lot of times, like if we're setting up on a stage to perform, we want to be facing straight ahead towards the audience. Not always, but most people usually set up that way. So right now, the camera that I'm talking into is the audience, and I want to be facing you guys. So I put my throne down, and I make sure that I have this straight line right into the camera, the audience, and that's the way I want to be facing. So next step. What happens when you just sit down and you lift your legs up and you lean back so you don't fall over? And then you just plant your feet down naturally. If you look at your feet, you'll see that they're sort of angled out to the sides like this. Now, let me grab the camera so I can show you what this looks like. You see that both feet are kind of angled, right? They're not like crazy angled, but they're certainly not straight forward because that's not what the body does. The body has this slight outward, like duck feet kind of angle going on. This is super important because that's what the body wants to do. Now, the reason I'm taking so much time with this very basic observation is because most drummers do not set up their kit to accommodate this natural position. Most drummers will take their bass drum and face it forward towards the audience, the way we're facing, right? But that means that your right foot has to face forward as well, because that's the direction of the pedal. And as a result of that, they end up angling their hi-hat stand and pedal further off to the side to sort of compensate for this imbalanced, non-symmetrical position. Okay, so again, I'll grab the camera and show you that. So if we're putting the bass drum straight forward, the right foot would be straight forward, right? That's towards the audience. And then we need to compensate with this left foot. We end up with this more extreme angle, like that. Okay? Now, that is not balanced and not symmetrical. And if you were to just sit down like we did before and drop your feet, that's not what the body naturally does. And the problem with this is it creates posture issues and spinal column issues. So you're forward with that foot, you're angled with that one. Automatically, we're imbalanced in the feet and in the legs. And all that imbalance translates up into our spine and our upper body. And if we're facing forward now, we end up with this weird twist in our spine, right? Because we're not facing this way. We want to face forward. We end up with this twist, right? So already for me, that just feels so bad in my body. Like it creates all this weird tension, and it's just imbalanced. So okay, we don't want to do that. So back to setting up the kit. You put your throne down. You face the direction you want to face. You drop your feet as they naturally would go, and then you add in your hi-hat and your kick pedal at this point. And if you got someone to help you, they could just bring it over for you, and you could lift up your foot and just the pedal will go directly under it. That way you know got it right. But for now, I'll just grab the stuff myself. So kick drum comes over here, and the hi-hat will go over here, and you can see the kick drum is not facing forward. It has this slight angle that goes off this way, right? Because that's what my foot does. And then same for the hi-hat stand, slight angle. It's just mirroring what my feet and body do naturally, okay? And then as far as spacing, again, it's just a natural thing, like what feels good to you. Like, obviously you don't want to be too close together, you don't want to be way out, like, where do your feet naturally land when you sit on your throne? And that's pretty much where you want your pedals to be, okay? So, that's that. The snare drum should go, ideally, right between my legs, so it's right in the center. And then when I actually go to hit the snare drum naturally, without reaching or without pulling back, the tip of the stick should be right in the middle of the drum. Okay, so right now we have this. So right now, I'm not quite in the center, I'm here. So this snare drum needs to come towards me a little bit. Maybe a half an inch. Just a tiny bit more. Okay? So basically, right there, where I'm hitting the middle. Okay? You can see that how the pedals are balanced and slightly angled outwards. And you can see that the snare drum is right in the middle of those pedals, basically. The next step would be to add in your toms. So I would probably start by throwing in the rack tom. Now this is a 4-piece kit. 5-piece kit is just slightly different, but everything, it's a similar concept. So the biggest thing with toms is the angle situation. You can see I got this big gap between the snare and the tom. So the tom is too far away. I would have to reach for it, which messes up my efficiency and my balance and would mess up the way that I'm trying to play and create music. So first thing we gotta do is bring this tom closer to me. All right. It basically should touch the snare drum, almost. We don't want it touching, but it should generally come close. A lot of times you see the rack toms, the finish is all chewed up right here because the snare bumps into it all the time. And like I said, although we don't want it touching, most drummers and most people, you know, we're trying to get that tom as close to us as possible. Okay, so now that I have it there and it's close, it's kind of weird. It's sloping this way. And so if I were to just naturally reach out and play this drum, it's all right for my right hand, but my left hand hits the rim. Okay, so getting that angle right is important. So I would want to make it sort of in plane with the snare drum. Right, so then when I naturally play. Okay, so that's kind of perfect for this drum. Now, we don't want an angle that's super steep, like that, because that creates an efficiency issue. You see how much space there is here when I go to hit the drum? It kind of ruins the sound. You end up with a choked up sound, and it feels strange, and it kind of creates some stress coming from the drum back into the stick, back into your body. Okay, so we don't want too steep of an angle on the drum, and nor do we want too flat, because like we already saw, we just hit the rim the whole time. So it's about finding that sweet spot where it's, you know, it's kind of in between. It's not too angled and it's not too flat. And when we play the drum, the stick is relatively parallel to the head without hitting the rim. But also, there's enough rim involved that if we want to play rim shots, we can. Alright, if we had too much angle, we wouldn't be able to play rim shots, okay? So that's about perfect for that drum. Now, basically, the floor tom is going to be close to the height of the snare drum. This one is actually probably a tiny bit lower than the snare drum, and that can change based on the player, based on you, like what feels good. And it could be a little higher and have a little bit steeper of an angle, or it could be a little lower and be more flat. Those are things you'll want to experiment with. I will say this one very important thing when it comes to floor toms is that you don't want it too far away, obviously, because you'd be reaching for it and messing up your posture and efficiency to get to it. And you don't want it too close, where every time you go over there, you have to bring your arms in order to play it. So you end up having to change your upper body position in order to hit this drum. So it's the same kind of idea as how we place the snare drum. If I just go around the drums naturally, without changing my upper body, I should hit it right in the middle. Okay, so that's a tiny bit far away for me. Okay? The idea is efficiency. You want to be able to move around the kit without having to reach or pull back or twist a lot or do weird things that your body doesn't want to do. Okay, so next we'll add the cymbals. This is a 4-piece kit. So the ride will just come in here like that. And, you know, there's maybe a little more flexibility on height and angle as far as the cymbals. You can experiment with that. Sometimes I'll play them really low and more flat. Sometimes they'll be up a little higher with more of an angle. It also depends on how low or how high your toms are, right? Because you don't want the cymbal bumping into your rack toms or whatever. So I would say that this cymbal, the way it is right now, is kind of right in the middle. I could almost go a pinch lower with it, maybe. And then it's the same sort of thing with the angles that we looked at on the rack tom and floor tom. We want it to kind of reflect what the drumstick is going to look like when I actually go over here. Okay, so you can see I got a little gap here, but not too much. I'm coming close to being sort of parallel with this plane, this surface of the cymbal. The angle is facing me. I don't have it angled away from me that way or away from me that way. It's angled directly in line with where my arm is going to go, and it's facing me. So that when I play it with the stick, it's doing what it wants to do naturally. Okay, so that's the ride cymbal. Again, not too far away, not too close. I don't want to have to reach forward. I don't want to have to pull in when I get over there. You want to be able to crash on it if you want to, like you saw, be able to get on the edge and be able to get to the bell without having to reach too far. Okay, so experiment, see what works for you. Again, if you're playing a 5-piece kit, you're going to have another rack tom here probably, which means your ride usually will go sort of this direction. So the rack tom comes in here, and the ride is going to have to be further off to your right and probably higher with a little bit steeper of an angle, generally. But that's usually still not a bad spot for it. You just want to make sure you're not reaching it. I usually have it actually covering part of that rack tom, and not to the point where I'm going to bump into it when I'm playing the rack tom, but far enough in so that I get it as close as possible. So again, I kind of like to have this sort of as close as possible. So I don't have to reach, but not so close that I'm pulling in, and maybe it covers the rack tom a little bit, but not so much that I'm gonna hit the cymbal every time I try to hit the rack tom. As far as height here, this will usually end up being a little higher than the ride cymbal for me, and that's fine. But I don't want it too high because I don't want to have to reach up for it. I kind of like things sort of as low as I can get them in a way. I don't like my stuff too high because I usually play with a lot of dynamics and a lot of finesse, and I'm not bringing my sticks way up high like a proper rock drummer would do, in which case, like, those guys can get away with having cymbals way up high. They mostly do it because it looks cool, I'm afraid to say, but they can get away with it because their sticks are going up that high anyways. For me, my sticks aren't going up that high, so I want things to be within reach. I didn't really talk about hi-hat height, but you can kind of see what I got going on here. I probably have like 6 inches of space between the hi-hats and the snare drum. I tend to like my hi-hats maybe a tiny bit lower than a lot of people. Not jazz guys. Jazz guys like them super low generally, but for like a rock pop thing, most guys would have them a little bit higher. But this works for me, and this is sort of a personal preference thing too. So, okay, check it out, right? We're like super symmetrical. We're facing forward. Snare drums right in the middle, thrones in the middle. Everything's got the perfect angle, the perfect height to work with my body and not create issues for me. So I think the biggest takeaway from this is making sure your hi-hat and bass drum pedals are slightly angled out and that you're not facing the bass drum forward and end up with this weird twist in your body because your pedals are doing weird things. That's probably the most important thing. And like I said, a lot of drummers, even really great drummers, that's the way they set up. But, you know, those guys, like, they'll probably have back problems in another, few years. It's just not the best way to do it. So, that's it for this video. I hope that helped, and I hope it was clear enough, and I got decent camera shots of all that. So, until next time, see you later.